Well, actually, the real tipping point of me getting very interested in writing, it takes a lot of discipline, it takes a lot of time, and ironically, it was my son leaving high school, so no one, who was the youngest of our 3 children, and him going to Gettysburg College. So when he came to Gettysburg, I stopped going to every basketball game, hockey game, you know, he was quite an athlete, and suddenly I had time. Now that's sociologically why it really opened up for me. And before that, you know, I was playing in my father's group, playing mostly electric bass, and my father, besides being a famous jazz musician, really wrote tons of music for chorus and orchestra, and I got real good training just listening to it, seeing what would work, performing with great orchestras around the world, getting to know conductors. One of the conductors that championed my father's music early in the game was a fellow named Eric Kunzel, who's passed away. But Eric Kunzel, really, in terms of his work with the Cincinnati Pops, he sold more records than the Boston Pops. He was really the king of all that kind of stuff. And Eric Kunzel heard a Christmas project that I worked on, where it was my first big thing for the Houston Symphony. I wrote all the arrangements and stuff. And just since I knew him as a kid, I said, "Hey, Eric, you might get a laugh out of this. This is my first effort." And he went, "Oh my God, you're really good at this. I want to put you to work with the Cincinnati Pops." That was the beginning of it. And the culmination of this was, as you probably know, I just came back from the Grammys, where I was nominated along with my father for this piece we wrote called Ansel Adams America. And someone else came to me with this idea, but the iconic photographer Ansel Adams, his estate, which is tightly controlled, so you don't have Ansel Adams Frisbees at McDonald's or whatever, they reluctantly, it took a lot of work to get them to allow us to project 100 photographs of Ansel Adams' work over the orchestra, and then my father and I wrote a symphonic suite to go with these pictures. And not only was that a cool idea artistically, but in the classical music world, there's all this worry, and believe me, it's been going on for 40 years. You know, what are we going to do? Classical audiences are dying and things like that. And so part of the reasons that we got the grants to write this piece and had 8 orchestras in on the initial consortium of people that commissioned it is the idea it brought different kinds of people to the concert hall. It's like people that say, "Well, I love photography, and Ansel Adams is the king of American photography. Nah, this orchestra stuff, I can take it or leave it." But it brought them in there. And then when you saw the synthesis of both the images and the music, as a friend of mine said that saw it, said it was more than just like 1 + 1 = 2. When the things work right, and the images are strong, and the music hits, it's 1 + 1 = 3. It's really transcendent. And there's a lot of people that do things like, you know, Bugs Bunny plays the classics and all this kind of stuff, which is fine if that gets people in the concert hall as well. But the idea of having, you know, obviously Ansel Adams is a very classy American art form, and the orchestra is, when you bring those together, it was a classy way of, and we did what we achieved. What we hoped to do, which I think the average audience was 40% bigger for those concerts with Ansel Adams. And so we're thrilled because we just had the European premiere, and we're doing it at Wolf Trap this summer with the National Symphony Orchestra, which is a big venue to try this kind of thing. It's been really wonderful. I mean, and this is getting kind of deep, but I know, especially since my father just passed away, we sometimes wonder, like, what is the karma of all this? You know, it's like, is it totally random that you get born into a musical family? You know, it's like people always ask about nature versus nurture and all this kind of stuff. But it's been a real privilege. I mean, this lifetime has been amazing. My brother Dan's a great drummer. My brother Darius is a great piano player. My brother Matthew's a great cello player. We've played together quite a bit. We live in different parts of the world, so Dan and I, the drummer, work together the most and record. We have 3 albums out, and we're really happy. There's a sort of a burden to carry on the legacy. And when I say burden, that's sort of in the best sense of it. And we've done that, and we were very fortunate because our last recording was called Lifetimes, and it was really a salute to our dad, because we knew that he was in declining health, although we didn't expect him to pass away when he did. That was a surprise. But just, we really want you to know how much we really love your music and appreciate you. And it was great because that was coming from a loving spot, and we weren't thinking commercially, and yet they just announced, of all the jazz records released last year, our record was #7 for the most played jazz record in the United States. So that made us feel like, wow, okay, we are extending this legacy. And it's also nice because, you know, there's other very musical families. Wynton Marsalis came up about 2 weeks before my dad passed away, and we all had a big meeting. He wants jazz at Lincoln Center to salute his music, and he wants the sons to be involved. And we're talking about, can the Marsalis brothers play with the Brubeck brothers? So when these musical families happen, I mean, there are lots of great talented musicians. And I've talked to some of them, like one guy was a great drummer, and he wanted to be a professional musician. But his parents were like, oh my God, be a doctor, you know, like, and they wouldn't let him practice in the house, and so this guy had to go out and rent a horrible frozen apartment in Chicago to set up his drums to practice in. I mean, if you really want to be a musician, you have a burning desire, you will find a way. And in that sense, we're very lucky, because my parents never said, you're nuts, you must be a doctor. How could you possibly want to be a musician? You know, I mean, they weren't hypocritical, because Dave was a dreamer and he did it. And that's the other thing, is like, it's not just the fact that your father is a musician or is a famous musician, but our father was someone that set such an amazing example of believing in your artistic dreams and creating an original path. For example, he was turned down by every record company. He had to start his own record company to make a recording. And then, and that's actually turned out to be a famous record company called Fantasy Records. They got really famous when the rock group Creedence Clearwater Revival started having all their hits on that. But he also got screwed out of the record company that he started by his business partners. And yet that turned out to be fortunate, because Columbia Records picked him up and they had massive distribution, more than his own record company that he got screwed out of. And that combination of Dave getting with Columbia was fantastic. And also, you know, most jazz artists, like you think of John Coltrane, you think of My Favorite Things. Well, why did we record Broadway show tunes? Well, most people don't know this. It's because the Columbia Records owned the publishing to a lot of Broadway show tunes. So they would say to the jazz artists, record that tune if you can turn it into a jazz tune. And my father said, no, I'm doing original music. And they're going, what? No one does that. You won't sell. Well, not only that, I'm doing original music and odd time signatures. Then it's like double. What? You can't possibly do that. Are you crazy? Well, we want to put at least, you know, a beautiful girl with lots of curves on the cover, because that always sells records. I'm putting modern art. So he broke every conceivable rule. And the record companies didn't even want to put out Time Out. And it took, in the old days, like here we have Clive Davis, who's just put out his new biography about what a genius he is. In the old days, people that ran record companies, I know it's novel, but they were musicians. They knew something about music. You know, they weren't lawyers. And this guy heard Dave's music and said, I've got a hunch. You know, and he put out Dave's record, and the rest is music history. And you know, there are trailblazers. I really think of my dad being as original as Jimi Hendrix relative to what was going on. You know, different kinds of music, obviously, but people that took risks and made new music people hadn't heard before. And those are the things that really pay off when you can revolutionize your art field. The jazz music industry is really like a different planet than pop music. And the way, think of the music business as a big piece of pizza, okay? So 5%, a very small slice, is both jazz and classical as part of the business. And then, you know, country is like 20% and rap is like 40% and, you know, whatever. So it's a very small slice. And the whole record company thing is changing. I mean, at this point, you almost need to make records in the same way culturally that you used to make business cards. Very few people are going to get rich selling records, but you know, and how you make your living is getting concerts and doing concert fees. And how do you get concerts? Well, you do it by getting airplay and being sort of the talk of what's going on. A friend of mine was talking about putting their record on sale for Facebook and asking advice, and then the other artists that we're talking to just started laughing. Like, no one makes any money selling music anymore, because unfortunately, and I'm not trying to say this as, you know, an angry old person from a different generation, but there's a whole culture that absolutely sees nothing wrong with ripping off music. You know, and literally the technical act of ripping it off, never mind the colloquial term for, you know, not paying the artist. They're not even guilty about it. It's gone, it's changed. It's a thing of the past. So I think your income is really making live records, and if you become part of the culture, maybe you make a taste, you know, like for example, the Silver Linings Playbook, which is a movie I've been too busy writing to see yet, but I know 2 of Dave's tracks are in that movie, which I think is great, and you know, it made some money for the publishing company that he started. Or you get a commercial or that kind of thing. But it's, yeah, the way you make money is really different. On the other hand, it's very global. Like one of the next records I'm going to put out with my group Triple Play is a record we did with the Singapore Chinese Orchestra. And it's actually been done for 4 years, and we haven't put it out because I've had other projects, and you can't sort of have too many of your own things out there competing against themselves. But one of our big problems, we know China is completely rips off intellectual property so much that you can't even sell it over there for the usual statutory rates of publishing that makes any sense, because people bootleg it and sell it for cheaper than the royalties are. You know, so you have to just, you can't fight, you know, this tidal wave of everything intellectual property is all free. So you just got to roll with it. I mean, I can't help them. I'm a creative person, and one of the main ways I make my living is, fortunately, every time I write an orchestra piece, someone from a different orchestra hears the piece that I wrote and says, I really want you to write me a piece, and they pay me. And not only do I make money that helps me concentrate on that and write the piece, but then every time that piece gets performed, I make a little money. So right now I have like 7 commissions in the future, like Airplanes Circling to Land, and 2 that are premiering in the next 2 months. And how I get it done is just through the patience and good graces of my wife, because I just say, you're becoming a composer, widow. I'm going down to my studio basement, and I get up at 4 every morning before the phone starts ringing and hope to find a creative spot and just keep writing. So there's lots of great musicians out there, but very few have the insane discipline it takes to go through the motions of writing a symphonic piece. It takes hundreds of hours of detailed work. It's sort of like putting the Bible on the head of a pen.
I mean, it sounds to me like processing through the compositions you're creating are sort of like, you think of the sort of concept album. Like, I'm from the generation where I can, if you said what are your top 5 albums, I could name them. I feel like the younger folks of today don't process albums in the sense of a group of things intentionally put together to create a certain experience.
You're absolutely right about that, Paul. In fact, I heard the story, which I find hard to believe, but a person was telling me in the business, he said he was talking to his grandkids and he was talking about albums, and the kid said, well, what's an album? And he said, well, that's the thing they had before CDs, you know, which you put, what's a CD? Well, that's the thing they had before. You know, I was like, oh my God, are we that old? But not only that, well, a lot of times people have written about this, is like, I remember when a new Beatle record came out, of getting together and hearing it was a cultural experience, to share that. Now we have everyone wearing headphones on the subway listening to music, and they often just listen to tracks. So the idea of a concept album, something that hangs together, that actually takes something that would, like a concentrated 45-minute, 50-minute, maybe 60-minute listening devotion, you know, that you might have to dig. I mean, it's a very rare thing. Culture is changing. People want sound bites, and they don't want to dig in, which is too bad, because that's another art form. Can you be a great group? You know, like Sgt. Pepper's. I don't know if that's one of your top 5, but you know, that's an amazing record that really should be experienced in totality to check out what the Beatles accomplished there.